Thanksgiving, Christmas,
4th of July, Easter,
4th of July.
get together.
Yeah, get together like at a dinner table or like at a picnic.
Well, more like a picnic, but
Okay.
still like a group gathering.
do you
Some
ever-
fireworks later?
Okay. All right. Do you ever find those times fraught with difficult conversations?
Of course.
I mean, like
what?
a forced conversation?
Small talk with your relatives, not fun.
Well, small talk. I'm thinking not so much small talk, but weighty talk.
Like what
Well,
politics?
What's
Like
that?
politics?
Yeah.
Certainly politics in the current day and age.
At least my family just knows not to talk about it.
Oh, really?
It's kind of like-
Your family's smarter than I am.
Well, we've had our fights, so we just kind of
If
know.
you're the one that brings it up, you suck.
Jeez.
That's you.
Okay.
That's on you.
All right.
Don't be that guy.
What was that?
All of my teachers.
Don't be that guy.
Don't be that guy.
A lot of my CTI teachers tell me to go to Thanksgiving dinner and bring up a a topic that incites conversation and trying to tell somebody else in my family that I'm smarter than them. And I think that's the dumbest thing ever.
Well, what if your family member is just 100% diametrically wrong about something?
They can be wrong all they want. And
You're
I
not
can see
gonna-
them,
you're not
they
gonna
can
change
do
your
whatever
mind.
they want to. Mill principle.
So you're really gonna invoke John Stuart Mill
Yes.
on this.
Yeah. They can be barbaric.
They can be barbaric if they
can do
want
whatever
to.
they want.
Yeah, everyone's opinion is important. Isn't that what it
Yeah.
is?
So I guess it's all a matter of how you define harm.
That's fair.
So let's go back to Mill and think briefly about the harm principle. I know that you've all had CTI 100. What you may not know is that I at one point taught CTI 100. You're probably asking yourself, oh my God, what must that class have been like? I think at the time I held the record, and I probably still do hold the record for the most students who have cried in a CTI 100 class.
Holy God. That's awesome.
Not intentional. So I don't know how to interpret that. So when Mill talks about harm, he talks oftentimes about, it's often interpreted as physical harm, I think, the way most people interpret it. What other harms can there be?
Harm of not knowing.
Mental.
So there can be mental, emotional harms. What do you mean by harm of not knowing?
Like, that you're doing something to yourself that you just think is right, but is wrong. Like, it hurts yourself more than it.
I don't know, if you're hurting yourself, shouldn't we just let you do that? You're not hurting anybody else. That's kind of the crux of the harm principle. What other kinds of harms might we consider?
Spiritual.
Like to your own spirit or to the spirit of others?
I don't know, I was just kind of throwing some things out.
Well, I'm just questioning, like, what did you mean? Like, if it's spiritual harm to yourself, once again, I think Mill would probably be like pretty okay with that, because you're not infringing upon others.
It's been a while since I've had that class.
Well, it's been a while since I've taught that class. You guys having
Is there like
difficulties?
intellectual harm?
What would that be? How would you
Like
define that?
spreading false knowledge or?
So if you spread false knowledge, what harms come out of that? And this is an important question in an information age when you can basically get on the internet and write whatever you want. I have a blog. I can get on the internet and write whatever I want. There is a website for the Flat Earth Society, a group of people who sincerely believe that the Earth is flat.
Wait, do you believe that?
No, I do not believe that.
Okay.
No, I don't, because for one thing, it's not something that you can believe in or not. The Earth is either flat or it's not.
Yes.
And guess what? You know, we have science and satellites and all kinds of things that show that it's not flat. And so,
I believe it's a
So
hoax,
what's
all
their
science and
argument?
all that. I believe
Pardon?
it's a hoax.
How do they
Believe
rationalize
science.
their
Oh my
I
God.
believe that
argument?
those pictures are
Just
meant
to
to like
just,
keep us
is
from
there like, is there like
freaking
a
out.
main argument they have?
It's
Like,
the-
what-
there are
Do
lots
you
of them.
think
I'm not
the
gonna
Earth
waste
is
time if you're
flat?
really
I
interested.
used
Go
to.
and log on to the Flat Earth
Tell
Society.
me.
I thought it was just like one thing you said, like, this is advice.
So CTI classes deal with these three big questions. What can we know? And now I'm forgetting one of
How
them.
do we know it?
What can we know? How do we know it? And how should we act,
Yeah.
essentially? And the flat Earth thing falls into the category of what do we know and how do we know it? If you can know something in that way, like we know the Earth is an oblate spheroid, we know how many miles in diameter the Earth is, et cetera, et cetera. We know these things because pictures from space, pictures from the International Space Station, pictures from high altitude flying planes, we know this from seasonality, we know this from all of these different lines of evidence, such that the Earth is not flat. Like, on some things, science can put its foot down and say, this is the way objective reality is, and in this way, objective reality is fairly objective and fairly real. Same thing about gravity. Gravity is a reality. Physicists know surprisingly little about how gravity actually works. As it turns out, I asked our physicists, what do we know more about? Do we know more about the evolution of species via natural selection, or do we know more about gravity? And they're like, yeah, we don't really know that much about gravity. We're physicists. The people who should know something about gravity, there are a lot of good theories about how gravity works, but it's very difficult to wrap your head around what's actually going on with gravity. It's basically a distortion of space-time. Thanks, physicists. Yeah, you don't see people walking off of buildings. Like, nobody. Can any of you tell me how gravity works? No. Any takers?
There's a formula, isn't there?
There is I guess there is probably a formula somewhere. I don't know what that formula is. I would have to go and consult my physics colleagues. But your lack of knowledge about how it works doesn't prevent you from respecting the fact that it happens, that it is objectively real. So in some sense, there is an objective reality that we can all agree upon, which is that gravity works and you shouldn't step off of a tall building without some precautions like a parachute, like those big blow-up things that people jump into when they jump out of buildings when there's a fire. So, information. So you're talking about information, Sydney. What harms can come from spreading false information?
I mean, there can be like an act of like panic and stuff, like when you scream like fire in a crowded building and there's not actually a fire. That would be
Or you go on the radio and act out a radio play without telling people at the beginning of the radio play that it's a radio play. Anybody know what I'm talking about? What am I talking about, Brian?
There was a radio broadcast of, was it War of the Worlds?
The War of the Worlds.
And people thought the Earth was being invaded by Martians.
The people thought that the Earth was being invaded by Martians. Not only did this happen once here in the United States, it happened over and over again after it happened in the United States. It happened in Chile. They put it on the radio in Chile. People freaked out in Chile because they thought that the world was coming to an end. We were being invaded by extraterrestrials. People did weird stuff like jump out of buildings because they thought that they were going to die and they would rather die at their own hand rather than die at the hands of some strange alien creatures. Misinformation, in some cases, can actually get people killed. What other ways can bad information be harming?
Legislation.
Okay, well, explain.
Or so like,
Yourself.
if there's widespread misinformation, it will affect
just in the last couple of days, Mark Zuckerberg has been talking about changes that they're making to Facebook to basically shut down misinformation campaigns from foreign governments as these foreign governments ramp up misinformation campaigns in preparation for the 2020 elections. Because foreign governments want to weaken our system of governance, because the weaker we are as a nation, the better they can become strong actors in their regions of the world. And so it shouldn't surprise you the countries that have spread misinformation campaigns in the 2016 election and are ramping up to spread misinformation in the 2020 elections. Any guess as to which countries were in the news yesterday
Russia.
about these things?
Russia.
Russia and
China.
China. Oh, shocker. No big surprises there. Who are our big competitors on the world stage in terms of power and influence? So it's important to be information literate. It's important to be able to evaluate information sources and things like this, because information can have consequences when it is bad information. What are other consequences of misinformation? What harm can be done? Those are the only two. The War of the Worlds and the 2016 and 2020 campaign. My mother. I have a fractious relationship with my mother. And the reason I have a fractious relationship with my mother is she raised a liberal, Democrat-leaning person, and somehow she grew into some Republican whack-a-mole. And this is my mother I'm talking about. So she forwards this email to basically, I think, every person she knows on the planet. Long ass email list. I am one of the people on the post, on this email, and she's basically forwarding a right-wing post about the Democratic women when they entered into the House at the beginning of the first term after the 2018 election. And all of the Democratic women showed up wearing white. Do you guys recall this being in the news at all? Oh, okay.
I think so.
So this guy was talking about these women who showed up wearing white. And if you read any of the mainstream news reports about this, the women were wearing white to honor the fact that this was the largest cohort of women ever in the history of the House of Representatives. Tons of women got elected in light of the 2018 elections, and they wore white because suffragists, you guys know what a suffragist is? What is a suffragist? Back in the early 1900s.
Is it women who wanted to vote?
It is women who fought for the right for women to vote, because into the early 1900s, women didn't have the right to vote. And so they protested in the streets for over a decade to try and win the right to vote, and they wore white. And so if you read newspapers and news outlets, the women showed up in what they referred to as suffragette white. And they actually, if you interviewed these women who showed up wearing white, this is what they said. And so your choice is to believe them, or your choice is to not believe them and concoct a more elaborate story. And the more elaborate story that was forwarded by my mother was that Nazi supporters in pre-war Germany also wore white. And that the reason that these Democratic women were wearing white wasn't because they were experiencing this historic event of more women in the House of Representatives than there ever had been, and harkening back to the women's suffragist movement of the early 1900s, they were actually Nazi sympathizers dressing in white to, I guess, advertise to the world their secret Nazi sympathies. And my mother spread this out to all of her friends. It's probably 55, 56, maybe 60 people. Spread this out in a blanket email saying, look at these Democrat women, a bunch of Nazis, et cetera, et cetera. So I was faced with a dilemma. What do I do about my mother? And I asked myself, is there harm in allowing really strange misinformation to be out there? What harm is done by allowing this to circulate among all of my family members? It was to all my aunts and uncles, all my cousins, as well as a bunch of people that I had never even heard of, who I guess are friends and acquaintances of my mother. And so I struggled for, I don't know, about a day over whether I should do anything or not. Can you guess what I did?
You did something.
I did something. Do you have any idea what I did?
Hit reply all, send some graphs.
Oh my, what was that, Riley?
I said, hit reply all, send some graphs.
Send some graphs. Unfortunately, I didn't have any graphs because there isn't really a lot of data about this. So what I did, when I was a kid, for some strange reason, I was fascinated with World War II. I was especially fascinated with the air war over Europe. I was really into airplanes. I made tons of model airplanes. I was like the only third grader who was reading historical biographies of people who lived and fought in World War II. You're getting a rare insight into how messed up I was as a child. One of my favorite books is this book called Reach for the Sky. Many of you read it? No, of course you didn't read it. You're not whacked out like I was when I was in the third grade. It's about this guy named Douglas Bader. He flew Spitfires in the Royal Air Force. He was in the Royal Air Force Academy between World War I and World War II, so he didn't see any fighting, but he became an aerobatic pilot. He was a very good pilot. He was on the aerobatics team from the Royal Air Force Academy between wars, and as part of one of these demonstrations that he was doing, he crashed and he lost both of his legs. Lost one leg below the knee and one leg above the knee. They said he would never fly again. He went on to become one of the top scoring aces of World War II. He was shot down by the Germans over France. He was put in one prison. Well, he first was put in a hospital because his leg got trapped. One of his fake legs got trapped in the cockpit of his plane. His plane was going down, and it ripped off of his stump and went down with the plane. And so he was in a hospital so his stump could recover because it was also damaged. And he also needed a new leg because his first leg was destroyed in the plane crash. And while he was waiting for the new leg to come in, they put him in a hospital. He tied a bunch of sheets together, lowered himself out of the window, and escaped with one mechanical leg and a stump. Recaptured by the Germans. They got him a new leg. They took him to a prison in Germany. He then escaped from that prison with 2 functional mechanical legs. And he finally became such an escape problem that they sent him to Colditz prison, which is this castle in Germany where it is on basically this big rock massif. And because it's basically a castle built on bedrock, it's impossible to tunnel out of. And so they put him in the most escape-proof prison because this legless dude kept escaping from Nazi prisoner of war prisons. One of my favorite books when I was a kid, because basically this dude just didn't take anything from anyone. He went to great lengths to do the things that he did. Anyway, I read a lot about World War II. So I decided that I would share my knowledge of World War II and the antecedents leading up to World War II with my mother so that she would get a sense of who who Nazis really are. So I went back and dug up my old history knowledge that I learned when I was a kid. And the weird thing is my mom knows that I know a lot about this time in history. I've read biographies about Adolf Hitler, I've read translations of Mein Kampf, because I was a weird kid. And so I recounted for how Hitler came to power. What did he do to come to power? What political machinations did he go through in the years leading up to World War II? Not to mention what happened in World War II, but most of what I talked about was actually pre-war stuff. How much do you guys know about pre-World War II Germany? A lot, kind of. Oh, Sydney, share with us.
Well, I took World War II last semester.
Oh yeah, who'd you take? Who teaches that?
Wilkins.
Okay. What do you know about pre-war Germany?
There was like the fascist movement happening
Yeah, but that grew out of what?
out of the Treaty of Versailles. Well, kind
Oh,
of.
the Treaty of Versailles sucked for Germany,
Yeah.
didn't it?
Yeah. So
What
they
was
kind of
wrong
like
with it?
blamed all World War I on them.
What was the deal with Treaty of Versailles? Explain to your college. Anybody else taking the World War II class here? Riley, also? Yeah. Oh, so contribute. Help Sydney out.
The Treaty of Versailles happened, and they like blamed a lot of it. They made Germany pay a lot of money. They like made them hugely downsize their armies. And
Do you know when Germany paid off its World War I debt?
Not for a long while.
10 years ago or something?
It was 1989. Germany's been paying off the World War I debt to the winners of World War I. They didn't pay while Hitler was in power,
Yeah.
but then they took up payments again after the war was over, and yeah, they paid it off. I think it was like 1989 is when they finally got out from under the debt that was imposed upon them by the Treaty of Versailles. Continue. So I'm just saying that to indicate it was not an inconsequential financial burden on Germany.
The army, they made it really small,
Yep.
or non-existent, honestly. And they took some of its land away.
Oh, well, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you always lose territory when you lose
Yeah.
a war.
Yeah. Is that kind of mostly it?
What else happened between World War I and World War II? I told you we were going to start getting into history, right? All of this actually has bearing on food, and we'll get to that in a little while.
Their economy, basically, they had to suffer a lot of inflation,
We
and
did suffer a lot of inflation. People
they couldn't pay for everything.
carting wheelbarrows of Deutschmarks to the bread market to buy a loaf of bread and stuff like that. Really bad inflation, because what was happening globally between the two world wars?
Great Depression.
The Great Depression. And oftentimes we think about the Great Depression as something that happened in this country, but the fact of the matter is the Great Depression was a global scale depression in the same way that the recession of 2008 was a global scale recession. So the same kinds of issues that people were dealing with in this country, people were also dealing with in Europe. Germany was one of those countries. And the effect of the Great Depression was exacerbated by all of the economic hardship that was brought upon Germany by the Treaty of Versailles and all of the governmental monetary problems that the Treaty of Versailles caused the German government. So during the Great Depression, if it sucked to be in the Great Depression in the United States, it especially sucked to be in the Great Depression in Germany. When you are feeling financially disempowered, what is your response? As a society, as individuals.
Look for a leader that wants to bring you out of it.
You look for a leader who will bring you out of it. You look for a leader who's going to solve all your problems. You're going to look for a leader who's going to basically say, we're not paying this debt that has been imposed upon us by the Treaty of Versailles. And then proceeds to stop paying on that debt that was imposed on them by the Treaty of Versailles. You look for a strong leader who's going to fix everything. They found a strong leader who fixed everything. It fixed everything. What else did Hitler do while he was rising to power? Those of you who've taken the World War II class.
He created a lot of like propaganda for Germans way. So like youth movements and just like benefits of being a Nazi, sort of. Like they traveled around Germany and like had resorts and stuff.
So he definitely had a propaganda machine to spread his message. What else did he do to kind of change the mindset of common everyday Germans? Did you guys study about the beer hall putsch? Oh no.
No.
Vaguely remember that. Some kind of riot.
It was a riot of sorts, yes. So what Hitler did during pre-war, this was back in the late 20s and early 30s actually, as he was rising to power, he had a group of followers that were called the brown shirts. You guys learn about the brown shirts? They were his followers. They eventually turned into kind of formalized police, but these brown shirts, what they would do is they would go around, and because one of Hitler's propaganda spiels was that one of the roots of Germany's problems was that Jews were in charge of the economy, and as a result they were taking all of the Germans' money, hoarding it for themselves, which was crashing the German economy. Didn't have anything to do with the global depression that was going on at the time. And so he used propaganda to basically turn common people against the Jews. And then he used the brown shirts to go out and attack Jews in places where Jews gathered. And this happened over and over and over again until finally the Jews got tired of it, and then the Jews started fighting back. And as soon as the Jews started fighting back against the brown shirts, the propaganda machine of Hitler basically said, see these Jews? They're violent. They're not only taking all your money, but they're also inciting violence, in spite of the fact that the Jews were really just responding to violence that was already being perpetrated against them. So Hitler basically turned public opinion against the Jewish people in Germany by orchestrating a set of actions done by his followers that then eventually led to a response by the Jewish people, and then highlighted not the actions of the brown shirts, but highlighted the reactions of Jewish people. Guess what? It was really effective. People in Germany thought Jews were the root of all their problems. People in Germany thought Jews were violent and, fomenting an uprising against the state. So that when it came time to put Jews in ghettos and things like this, the German people were ready to see that happen because they viewed Jewish people as kind of enemies of Germany. And this was all before the war started. He was brilliant. He was a brilliant manipulator. He knew how to use propaganda. He knew how to use rhetoric. There's a lot to respect in Adolf Hitler, except for all the really hideous stuff. Sorry, if any of you are neo-Nazis, I'm sorry, this is probably difficult for you. Should probably have listed that as a disclaimer at the beginning of all of this. So, autocrats, any autocrat anywhere is going to do things according to a set of ideas that work when you're setting up an autocracy. An autocrat is a person who consolidates power to the head of state and then uses that power to basically then do whatever that they want to. And it generally begins by finding a disgruntled populace, finding a scapegoat that you can blame those disgruntled people's plight on, demonizing those people who are causing the plight of the disgruntled people, organizing those disgruntled people, placing blame for basically everything wrong with society on these people who are basically painted as other, using anything that those people do that might be violent, even if it's a reaction to what your people are doing, to basically consolidate police power, which is something that also Hitler ultimately did. He consolidated police power within the executive branch and consolidated military power within the executive branch in Germany. Until you basically have control of all aspects of the government, and then at that point you can do whatever you want to do. And in this case, Hitler finally decided to invade Poland, which kicked off the Second World War. It's a well-known, well-rehearsed playbook of how you take over a country. And I laid all of this out to my mother and said, "Mother, this is what Nazis do. This is what Nazis did leading up to World War II, and then once they got into power, they went on a systematic genocide of Jewish people, Roma people, anybody that they didn't like, people with disabilities, anybody that they thought was going to be a negative aspect of a post-war Germany. And then they did that, and they did that really, really well. That's the problem with Hitler, is he did a lot of things really, really well. These are who Nazis are. Female Democrats in Congress are not doing these things. For one thing, they don't have the power to do those things. They still make up a small minority in Congress. Secondly, they're not really demonizing other ethnic groups. They're not perpetrating or advocating violence against other ethnic groups. They're not doing a lot of things that Nazis do, or people who want to become autocrats are doing. So go educate yourself on what a Nazi is, and then stop sending out bullshit stuff like this, because it's just really damaging and harmful when you send this out as if it's true and accurate and try and influence the thinking of other people who won't take the time to go and read about what Nazis are actually all about. Misinformation can be harmful because it can influence the thinking of other people, and so there comes a point where people who know things should really put their foot down and say, that thing that you just sent out to all of my family members and a bunch of your friends is just categorically wrong, and here are all the ways in which it is categorically wrong. It's probably about a couple of thousand words.
What'd she say?
And I hit reply all. And she's never mentioned the email to me since. But I also don't talk to my mother as much as I used to, because she has lost the ability to think critically about things. She's lost the ability to think critically about lots of things. And maybe it's because she's in her 70s and her mind is beginning to go a little bit. I'm not sure what's happened to my mother. It's just weird when I look at my mother and I think to myself, you raised me to be the man that I am today, and I don't even recognize you some days. My sisters were not happy with me. They're in the same boat that many of you are. Don't rock the boat. You see your mother at Christmas and Thanksgiving. You don't see her most of the year because she lives in Houston, you live in Missouri. When you're together, don't make her cry at Thanksgiving. Or Christmas, or New Year's, or whatever. Because I also did that one Christmas. For a different set of reasons, but they were political reasons. Once again, my sisters were not very happy with me. So, one of my questions to you as critically thinking students out of colleges, hopefully training you to be critically thinking citizens in the world, at what point do you stop and say, the information you, person X, are propagating is wrong, here are the reasons why it's wrong, and you should stop propagating it, and as long as you propagate it, I'm going to counter it with information that is accurate. That is a question to you. At what point do you do that? Charlie?
I mean, I think like, if someone's straight up saying, like, telling like a lie, it's one thing to go in and be like, okay, this is wrong for this reason. But I don't think you can do that if someone's just saying necessarily about someone's opinions about like, oh, I like
So
somebody's
there's-
opinion, then it's a little bit different.
There's room for opinion, and then I would argue there's also places where fact comes into play. Yeah, okay.
I would say that a majority of people find it hard, especially to talk like politics and certain viewpoints and actually argue. Let's say
Mhm.
and pertain like maybe to family members. But you gotta, I would say like my biggest thing is that like I will lay those things out and I will
Mhm.
continue to counter. But at some point you need to just realize that you're not gonna be able to change someone's mind as much. You gotta go the only person that can change her mind anyone's mind about a certain viewpoint is themselves. Like,
Sure.
You can't just like, exactly, yes, you might have all the right facts and everything, but that won't change their mind exactly.
Which would
They
be
will-
fine for my mother if she only sent the email to me.
Yeah.
So I guess my question to you is, my response probably would have been different had she only sent the email to me. But she sent the email to this long list of people, which had some bearing on whether or not I was going to respond. So when you have a louder megaphone, when you can reach more people, do you have a different responsibility in what your response is to that? Because you don't necessarily think, oh, my argument is going to change the mind of this person. My thought is, I want to inform the other people that this went out to, because I know I'm not going to change
I
my
would do the
mother's
same
mind.
kind of thing, yeah, present all the facts and everything, but like, then again, I don't know, I wouldn't let it necessarily change how I think or feel about, like, get that in the way of like my relationships, like, yeah,
You
we
are
have different.
bigger
yeah, we
man
have-
than I.
Huh?
You are a bigger man than I.
Like it's, like you can't let it necessarily get you, because in the end, like, they're friends and family, you gotta love them for who they are, so.
Noah, you had your hand up a minute.
I was gonna say, basically what you got to at the point, at the end, like, you have to, if I don't know this person and I have no clue, who they are, and they're just spouting facts about something that is wrong, or I hear that they're just saying stuff that goes completely against what I think, I'll feel, not necessarily obligated, but I'll feel comfortable speaking
Mhm.
about it, because I can back my stuff up.
Mm-hmm.
But if it goes to the point where I care about somebody, I feel like I can hold my tongue and not push someone where I know that I don't really care that much, and if they wanna just live their life thinking that, they can think that, and I can live my life around them still, but just not go into that area.
Mm-hmm. Sydney, you had your hand up.
I mean, I think that if you're able to like change the person's opinion based on fact, which like if I'm friends with someone, I want them to be like knowledgeable and flexible, I guess, in their opinion, where it's like if I'm presenting them with facts and the facts are correct and that like changes their opinion, then like that would make sense because they're able to like consider all the things. And I think also like if you are a certain person that like supports someone that does things, that's very broad, but
Yes?
I guess I can just, if you're someone who supports like Trump and you don't know a lot about him, then like that would be just like wrong in the fact that you don't know a lot about him. But if you're someone that does support Trump and you do know a lot about him and those things that he has done doesn't like matter as much as like what like your opinion is, then like that is also problematic, and I probably wouldn't be friends with the person, I guess.
Sydney,
Like-
stop talking to me then.
So,
I'm just kidding.
so I didn't mention Trump at all in
No.
this conversation.
I'm just giving an example.
We know you're.
Just an example.
Yeah.
Lie.
Well, so you guys know that I'm not a huge Trump supporter, but this would be something that I would say about almost anything. The reason that I'm bringing this up is I want to talk to you about the genetically engineered food assignment that is now posted on Moodle. And go pull it up on Moodle. I have it up on Moodle because you have to write a letter to a relative. So, This assignment is designed to get you to think about what you learned when you went through the National Academy of Sciences report on genetically engineered foods. You should go and read the chapters that you didn't read in preparation for this. So you've got an introduction to those chapters, and you should go and read those chapters so that you have your own base of knowledge as well as the base of knowledge that your friends and colleagues started to give you in their presentations. Imagine that you were at Thanksgiving dinner and one of your relatives brings up the topic of genetically engineered foods over the dinner table. They're clearly concerned about the safety of these types of crops in the food supply and do not understand why farmers or agribusinesses would even be in the business of making these things, but it is clear that their concerns are more based in ignorance and social media than in any basis in fact. Your task in this paper is to explain your position on GE foods from the perspective of their safety, from a health perspective, their utility in terms of making agriculture more efficient or not, and the effect that they have on the economic plight of the average American farmer. Your explanation should be written in language that your relative can understand, but should communicate the nuance of the knowledge that you gained by reading the National Academy of Science report. You should write this response in 5 paragraphs, and the paper should be no more than 5 pages long, but should probably not be much shorter. 5 paragraphs. I'm looking for 5 paragraphs. I'm not looking for 10 paragraphs, 15 paragraphs. I'm not looking for 20 pages. Because it's your relative. They don't want to read 20 pages from you, trust me. They don't want to read 2,000 words from you, trust me. The first paragraph should explain to your relative what you mean when you use the term genetically engineered organism, and then you should lay out your general conclusions about GE organisms in the food supply in broad terms for each of the categories above. Paragraph 2, 3, and 4 should cover each of these areas: health effects, farming efficiency and productivity effects, and economic effects on farmers. And then the 5th paragraph should basically be kind of a summary paragraph along the lines of, it seems like you are concerned about these things because you really don't know that much about these things. Here are the things that you should maybe not be worrying about, and here are some things that perhaps you should be worrying about based on a group of very smart people looking at the issues having to do with this and passing judgment on what are potential problems and what are things that we should probably not be worrying about, and also recognizing the areas in which we are uncertain about whether these things are good or bad. Cite the National Academy of Science report as NAS 2015 and include the bibliographic citation at the end of your paper. Paraphrase rather than using direct quotes. Do not plagiarize, as it's the wrong thing to do, and I don't want to fill out the honor code violation paperwork. If you reference, no, I really don't want to fill out the honor code paperwork. It's just a pain. So do me a favor, don't plagiarize. You guys know what plagiarism is, right?
Yes.
You have received plagiarism in at least one course while you've been here?
Yes.
Everybody, raise your hand if you have received plagiarism training in at least one course at William Jewell College. No one has not. You know what has. Okay. All right. Then I'm proceeding that you know what plagiarism is and you've been taught how to avoid it. So paraphrase, don't use direct quotes. You could string together a letter to your relatives that is just a bunch of direct quotes from the National Academy of Science report, and you will not be technically plagiarizing, but you'll get an F. Why?
Because you don't have any analyzation.
You just wrote a really crappy paper. So write a good paper. Write in your own voice, paraphrasing the information that is found in there. If you reference other material in addition to the National Academy of Science report, make sure that it comes from reputable sources, not from Food Babe, Dr. Oz, or others of their ilk. And cite it at the end of the paper as well. There's a format here for you: author, date, article title, journal title, volume, page numbers, etc. Here are formatting expectations, so that I kind of know that your 5 pages is equivalent to somebody else's 5 pages is the main reason. For formatting, I want a double space so that I can write comments in between the lines and things like that as I go through and grade it. So you're writing a letter to a relative who has some preconceived notions about what genetically engineered organisms in the food supply are about, what they do, what the consequences of them are, et cetera, et cetera. But because you've read the National Academy of Science report, you know that a lot of those things are unfounded. They're just not factually correct. I want you to present, so this person is afraid of GE organisms and doesn't want them in their food supply, thinks that maybe thinks that there's a government conspiracy to do something to us through the food supply using these genetically engineered organisms, et cetera, et cetera. Your job is to clarify for them what is known about positive aspects and negative aspects of having genetically engineered food in the food supply. And it's there. There is no denying, you cannot argue that it's not there. It's there, it's in the food supply. The question is, are there positive aspects, are there negative aspects? Are there things that we just don't know about the effect of these things in the food supply? And your job is to educate them on the things that they don't know about. They've never taken an ecology food class, they're not biology majors, they don't know anything about this stuff. They're not farmers. Do any of you have a farming family? Kidding?
I farmed, and so did all my friends and a little bit of my family, so, yeah.
But they don't own a farm.
They use.
Like a production farm?
They use like a little bit of land off the fence, like 200 acres.
Okay,
so-
but they're not like
Not
employed as farmers.
ridiculously, like that's all they do, no.
Charlie?
No,
No.
nothing serious.
Okay, alright. So you can assume that everything this person knows about genetically engineered foods in the food supply is probably wrong. Your job is to give them the best information that you know about. And the best information that we know about is probably encapsulated in this report done by a bunch of relatively unbiased scientists. You should, as you read the National Academy of Science report, you should read the list of people who contributed to the report. You're going to find that it is largely made up of people who work at federal agencies and people who work at universities, but it also had contributions from people who work at big agribusiness companies as well. So familiarize yourself with kind of what the ratio of the different types of expertise were that went into preparing the report. Another thing that I would suggest to you is that one of the appendices are public comments. And so especially in the chapter dealing with human health impacts, there are a lot of references in that chapter to public comments that the National Academy of Science panel received during the preparation of this report. You should read through those things because it will also give you a flavor for what people, just the general public, was thinking about GE food, genetically engineered food in our food system as they were preparing the report, putting the report out there for public comment, receiving those comments, and then editing the report. Those things are going to be informative to you in getting somewhat into the mindset of people who took the time to comment during the public comment period for the report. This will be due November 20th, so before Thanksgiving. So it will also be there for you. All of this knowledge will be there for you when you go home for Thanksgiving in case genetically engineered crops come up over the Thanksgiving table. All right, questions about this assignment? Yeah, Sid.
So you wanted it in like letter form, like dear blah blah.
Sure, you can.
Yes.
Last time we did this, a number of the papers were dear Aunt Jenny.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's the other thing. I want you to write it as if you are writing it to a family member who doesn't know anything about this. So you need to walk away a little bit from the technical language of the report and express things in ways that Aunt Jenny would understand.
And do you want like a works cited at the end?
Yeah, if your works cited may have nothing but the National Academy of Science report citation, but yeah, if you use other sources, cite it at the end of the paper and cite it in the text where you're using them,
Yeah.
because that will inform Aunt Jenny where you're getting your information, and it will also inform Uncle Paul where you're getting your information as well, because I might want to go and look at those things to evaluate whether the claims that you're making about that thing are actually worth paying attention to.
Should we reference you as Uncle Paul then?
No, not at all. No, please do not. All right, yeah.
So, do we have to read the whole report, or
You need to
just
read
over?
Chapter 3, 4, 5, and 6, because Chapter 3 is an introduction to what genetically engineered organisms are, so you need to review that information as well as the stuff that we talked about in class, in order to write the first paragraph of this, what is a genetically engineered organism as it's used in crop systems in the United States. And then 4, 5, and 6 are the chapters dealing with agronomic effects, health effects, and economic and social effects. And then the 5th paragraph is your summation. Yeah. So you don't have to read the whole report. You just have to read those aspects those chapters of the report that I've asked you to read, which are 3, 4, 5, and 6. So some of you have delved deeply into one chapter. You need to go and read the other chapters as well so that you'll be as up to speed as your colleagues were who dealt in depth with that chapter. So you guys did social and economic effects. You need to read the human health effects chapter and the agronomic effects chapter so that you're as well informed as they are. We did the report presentations to kind of get the other groups up to speed on the chapter that you read deeply, so that when they didn't go and read that, they're not approaching it blind. They're approaching it with already some knowledge of what was in there. Okay? Questions about that? Long walk to get you in a mind frame for writing this paper. But your job is to educate and inform somebody who is uneducated and uninformed. Hopefully what you're doing while you're here is becoming educated and informed about some things. One of the things that you're supposed to be becoming educated and informed about is polyphase farm. So, the Michael Pollan book, The Omnivore's Dilemma, is divided up into 3 big areas. The first section of the book has dealt with corn production and how corn production proceeds, what corn is used for, et cetera, et cetera. We haven't read all the chapters in that first section. We're not going to read all the chapters in that first section. In the same way, the second section deals with a different way of farming at Polyface Farm out in Virginia. You've seen some aerial photographs of this farm. We've talked some in the last test material about how this farm differs from the Naylor farm. I want to delve into those differences even more so starting today and probably into Friday a little bit. So I asked you to read chapter 8 and chapter 11. Chapter 8 is just kind of an introduction to the farm, and then chapter 11 goes more in detail into the farming practices on a day-to-day basis, because Michael Pollan actually went to Polyface Farm and worked on Polyface Farm for a while. So who can tell me what Joel Salatin does? What's his philosophy about farming, and how does that get reflected by the way he runs his farm?
The animals do also,
Okay, explain what you mean by that.
well, we talked about the, process of grazing, where the cows graze and then the chickens are moved throughout the field. They eat the rest of the grass and then also eat the little bugs that are in the cow poop. And then they also fertilize the grass, so they're doing the fertilization work. Instead of having machines or other, I mean, it would be a lot of work for a person to do it, but, having to do that manually, the animals just kind of do that. And then the pigs make the fertilizer to, in the winter, or was it cows?
Cows
Pig.
produce the fertilizer, and then the pigs do what in the spring?
Oh, they mix it up.
Yeah. So basically, he's using the natural behaviors of the organisms to do the work on the farm. So when he says he gets animals to do most of the work, his job is doing what? Getting the right animals to the right place at the right time. That's Joel Salatin's job. And if he can get the right animals to the right place at the right time, they will do most of the work of the farm. And so he is basically using the organism's natural proclivities to basically set up a really super efficient farm. If you have your books available to you, or if you have them on your iPads or something like that, on page 222, it gives you the productivity of the farm. Were any of you guys struck by the productivity of the farm? Does that seem like a really productive farm or a not very productive farm? You guys have no opinions?
Did you read chapter 11?
You clearly did. Part of it, at least. What
It
kinds of
doesn't seem
organisms?
very productive.
What's that, Sydney?
It doesn't really seem totally, I mean, yes, it does, I guess, seem productive.
So it's 450 acres, right?
Yeah.
How much of this acreage is pasture? Oh, sorry, 550 acres. I was off by 100 acres.
1,000? Wait. It's more acres than that, isn't it?
On page 223, it says it's 550 acres. And if I recall, about 150 acres of it is forest. I would have to go look up, and the rest of it is pasture. So about 400 acres of pasture. And out of this, he produces 30,000 dozen eggs. 12,000 broilers, chickens that you use for cooking, 800 stewing hens, 50 beef cattle, 250 hogs, who spend most of their year in the forest, 800 turkeys, and 500 rabbits. So it's a meat production operation, which is different from the Naylor farm, which is primarily a plant production farm. This strikes me as a ton of productivity of animals out of a relatively small farm. When you think about the number of cattle that you graze per acre, for example, on a ranch in Texas, your stocking rate on a ranch in Texas would be 1 or 2 beef cattle per acre. And so you're getting 1 or 2 beef cattle per acre. You're getting many fewer beef cattle than you would if you were just strictly a beef operation on 400 acres of pasture, but you're also getting all of these other food products as well. 30,000 dozen eggs, so that's 30,000 times 12. That's 360,000 eggs a year. Seems like a lot. 12,000 broilers, that also seems like a lot. Yeah, Charlie.
No.
Oh, I thought you had your hand up. So it's a pretty productive farm in terms of what comes off of it, given the fact that all of this, for the most part, comes off of this 400 acres of pasture, not off of the 150 acres of forest, which is mainly where the hogs live. So one of the questions that you could have about this particular farm is, how exactly does this level of productivity get sustained over time? When Joel Salatin first took over this farm, what was its status in terms of soil depth, amount of forest, etc.?
Probably wasn't as good.
Probably, or wasn't as good.
Wasn't as good.
In what way was it not so good?
Well, I mean, compared to like how much, or how it works now, it probably isn't as good, or isn't as good.
Wait, you're
Didn't
talking about
have
I'm
soil-
looking for
soil
specifics.
depth- Soil depth, right?
So what about soil
So
depth?
like, I mean, like with all the, animals running around or whatever, it's just completely tearing up the whole grounds, I would say, or like when that,
Is that what Poland said? Is that what Joel Salatin said?
I mean, that's what I say, so. I don't know, it's, I mean, like, if you think about it with all those animals just running around all the, forest and the pasture and everything like that, I mean, it really is just kinda like digging up all the soil, like, at least I know, like, hogs will, they absolutely
Hogs,
tear up.
hogs do tear things
Yeah,
up,
they tear
but
things
hogs
up
spend
and
most of
everything.
their year in the forest.
Okay.
And they practically never go into the pasture.
When I had chickens, we had it in like a little coop or whatever, but every time we were running over all the soil or whatever, at least over each kind of patch of grass, it absolutely just tears it up, at least the chickens do. It was disgusting how bad.
So what is different about what Joel Salatin
I'm gonna
has?
go ahead and say that he has a lot more nutrients in the soil, and before he took it over, it, wasn't this way.
Did any of you read the chapter? Okay. Assignment for Friday. It was the assignment for last week, and it was the assignment for this week. Read chapter 8 and 11. In the syllabus, you may not recall this on the first day of class. What is one of the things that is in the syllabus? I made a point of doing this semester in this class. When I ask you to read something, I really need you to read something. Because I'm going to come in and I'm going to ask you questions about the thing that you read, and you need to have something better for me than, I think it was probably worse than it is now. I realize that you have time, you have a limited amount of time, and this is probably the lowest priority class that is on your plate. I'm not asking you to read the whole book. I'm asking you to read sections that are important for you to understanding the kinds of things that we're talking about. Joel Salatin's farm was very different when he started up his operation than it is now. And it's different in very specific ways. You will know about those when Poland describes them to you. That then serves off as the jumping off point for me talking about the food web that Joel Salatin has set up, how that operates, and how it contributes to this change. If you have no idea what that change is, then I've got zero jumping off point. And I would much rather have you guys talk amongst yourselves with me contributing and drawing things out of you to explore that change than me just sitting up here and telling you everything that happened and why the food web is having that effect. Chapter 8, Chapter 11. Please read them. Come back on Friday ready to talk about those two chapters. Thank you very much.